Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to LMU Zoom-A-Palooza, our first annual online virtual conference. And our next speaker for 245 is Patience Melnik. Patience is the Waste and Resources Manager for the City of Knoxville. She managed the City of Knoxville's curbside trash and recycling program, the 5 city recycling centers, and the solid waste facility, which is comprised of the transfer station and the household hazardous waste facility. She recently helped launch the Knoxville Compost pilot project, Knoxville's first food scrap drop-off program. Prior to joining the city in 2017, Patience worked for nonprofits Keep Knoxville Beautiful and the Tennessee Clean Water Network. She holds a bachelor's degree in the classics from St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And today she is going to be talking to us today about Knoxville's waste and resources, what is going where and why, which I actually said that correctly this time. I keep butchering all of the W's and all the questions, but Patience, thank you so much. And I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Okay, everybody see that okay? I'm going to take that as a yes. Thank you again for having me. I'm here today to answer a few questions that I have listed here, just to kind of give you an overview of where this talk is going. Where does Knoxville's residential waste, recycling, and yard waste go? How does our waste contribute to climate change, and how can we minimize that impact? Is your recycling really being recycled? How beneficial is recycling to the environment? What are the benefits of composting our food scraps? And how can Knoxvillians participate in the city's new food scrap drop-off program? So I'm going to jump right in. I've got tons of information to share. So I know that not all of you are probably residing within the Knoxville city limits, or I'm guessing maybe not even all in Knox County, but I will say that when it comes to the recycling information in this presentation, it's going to be the same for anybody really in East Tennessee. There's one main recycler here in the area. The other 2 closest are in Asheville and in Chattanooga. So these rules will apply to you as well. And I'll try and keep it as general as possible, but I'm going to cover a little bit of Knoxville specific information. So our household trash is sent to first at what's called the transfer station here in Knoxville. And in a transfer station, the smaller trucks dump it, and then it's compacted and put into larger semis, and then driven down to Athens, Tennessee to go to the Meadow Branch landfill. Of course, that makes it a little more efficient than sending trash trucks directly there. We used to take our waste before last year up to Chestnut Ridge. That's the other likely location that your waste may be going to if you're not in the city of Knoxville limits. That's just on the other side of Knox County over in Anderson County. So those are the kind of the 2 big ones in the area for household garbage. There are other types of landfills for other types of waste, but the leaf and brush that are picked up at the curb, like you can see in the photo, they're mulched at one of 3 Living Earth sites in Knoxville. We contract with them. And then all of our recycling, both from the curbside bins and from our recycling centers, is sent to West Rock Materials Recovery Facility. We call that MRF for short, and that's right near downtown Knoxville. Here's a picture of West Rock. You can see that sorting line there on the left. Unfortunately, I see a lot of plastic bags in the mix there, which are a contaminant. We'll get to that later. And on the right, some bales. You can see plastic, and it looks like paper ready to be shipped out after it's been sorted, baled, and stacked. So this is a snapshot of our residential waste and recycling stream. And I should say that our city services are really for residents. So we have a small commercial program, but we're not generally collecting from businesses. They have to contract with private haulers. So this isn't a snapshot of like everything produced in the city of Knoxville. This is residential trash and recycling. You can see the blue and the green pies together make up our total recycling of 9% together. And then you compare that to the national average of 25%. And so you can see we have some room to grow there. That's in part because our curbside program is voluntary. We have about half of our residents signed up for that program. Room to grow there. The bright spot, however, is the orange pie piece. That's our leaf and brush. 37% is what we're collecting compared to the national average of 10%. And that is really important waste to keep out of the landfill because it's plant-based matter that produces those really potent greenhouse gases when they break down in the landfill without oxygen. So that's a high point in our program. And then the remaining 54% is, like I said, delivered to that landfill. So we kind of have a rough idea that trash is bad, right? But how exactly does it contribute to climate change? And the answer to this question is really, I'm just talking about the end of life. When you're finally done with something, whether it's some packaging that you've used once for 5 minutes, or it's, something like a couch. I'm only talking about that moment when you're taking that material and putting it, doing something with it, whether you're trying to recycle it or put it in the ground. But that's my area of expertise. Of course, with every item that you ever buy, there's a lot of what's called embedded energy in that item well before you get to the end of life stage, right? So it's the energy that went into mining the material that went into that product. And it's also the energy that was used to transport it and to, move it from a warehouse to home. And so basically our consumption overall is the big contributor to climate change. But in terms of just the end of life stage, basically, again, it's that plant-based material. So food waste, cardboard, paper, lumber, leaves and brush, etc. When those plant-based materials break down in the landfill, they're really compacted in there. You have these big earth movers compacting that material, trying to squeeze as much trash as they can into that land. And so when it breaks down anaerobically without any oxygen, that's when it's producing methane. And methane is typically, it kind of depends on the time frame that you're looking at, but typically it's 20 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So, and that also, I should say, is emitted from landfills as well. So very, very problematic contributor to climate change. The methane in the landfill is captured with what they call active extraction. So basically there's a system of pipes and tubes, and they're actively vacuuming it out. Before they knew about, climate change and those issues, they were already doing that to prevent fires. So that gas is sucked out, and they do the best that they can. They scrub that gas at Meadow Branch. Different landfills handle it differently, but as far as our landfill goes, it's on the better end of how they're managing these gases. One step better is to actually turn it into energy on site, but they're doing pretty well with it. They scrub it, and then they're feeding it back into the natural gas pipeline, which of course is also problematic. There are leaks and whatnot, but at least it's being reused. There's that beneficial reuse for it. So how can we minimize that impact? Just buy less. When you're at the stage with a piece of material, when you're asking yourself, like, can I donate this? Can I recycle it? Can I fix it? Or do I have to put it in the landfill? Again, a lot of energy has already gone into that item. So it's far better to never, purchase that item in the first place if you can avoid it, environmentally speaking, than it is to, say, even recycle it. If you are within the city, use the leaf and brush program. If you bag your leaves and brush and put it nice and tidy into your trash can, it's just going to go into the landfill. But if you leave it loose at the curb, the city will pick it up and it will be mulched. Compost, try composting. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Recycle, obviously. And then going further, regular people can support policies with our politicians to create a circular economy. So that's not just like, let's recycle. That includes the entire cycle of a material. So let's think about designing packaging for recyclability, for example. Let's think about capturing more of those materials, along the way. It's that whole cycle to keep these materials in use instead of a linear economy where they're ending up in the landfill. Expand recycling, require clear labeling. And then there's a lot of talk these days about extended producer responsibility, which is a bottle bill would be an example of that. Lots of states have programs for like batteries or mattresses. Tennessee has one for tires, where you're really setting up a system to try and keep that material in that loop. And the producer, the company that's getting rich selling these materials is taking some responsibility for keeping it in that loop. Is your recycling really being recycled? The short answer is yes, but only if it is recyclable. And that means when we say recyclable, what we mean is you can sell it. The WestRock, our MRF, can sell that material. So something to keep in mind if you're worried about, well, is this really being recycled, is recycling at the end of the day as a business. We don't decide at the city level or at WestRock, it's not like a moral choice of like, we're going to recycle this, but not that. Basically, it all just comes down to economics. The MRF, WestRock, makes money when they sell our materials, but they pay when they take the materials that they've received from us and have to landfill it, right? So obviously, if there's any way that they can sell these materials, they're going to. These markets are in constant flux. Industries make different things. They need different materials. You have things like gas prices affecting all different types of aspects of the recycling system. So, it's kind of in flux. Often, but in general, everything that you put in, if they can sell it, they're going to recycle it. Another fact about this is that recycling is going great in Knoxville. Knoxvillians are doing a great job. This is our team plus a couple WestRock folks over on the right. We did an audit last month. And I'm very proud to say that our contamination rate was only 17%, which the national rate is 25%. Nashville's last year was 28%. So we're doing a great job. So 17% of what was put into our bins was not recycled, but only because it wasn't recyclable. People put weird items that are clearly trash, like there was a wig and there was a mop and there was a broken chair, clearly not recyclable, people just using the recycling bin as a second trash cart. But then there was a lot of weird plastics, pouches, cartons, coffee cups that look like they're paper, but they're lined with plastic. What we call that wish cycling. So it's kind of a combination. That's what that 17% is. So just so you have a kind of a broader view of how this whole system works, just a quick primer on the history of recycling. In the 1950s, disposable packaging really kind of explodes on the scene. And with it comes questions and concerns about all the trash associated with it, and especially all the litter that started appearing everywhere. In response to that and to a bunch of different environmental disasters in the 1970s, you have the first Earth Day, the establishment of the EPA, and the first recycling programs, which were developed honestly by the beverage industry in partial response to these complaints. So that's something to always keep in mind, that recycling it's not for all your plastics. It's really beverage and food container focused for the most part, plus of course your cardboard and your paper. Recycling in Knoxville begins in the 1980s with our drop-off locations. We had 11, I think, at some point. We're now down to 5. And then the 1990s, that was a very important era in terms of explaining how we got to where we are today. The modern landfill was, kind of implemented in that era. And so then the modern landfill is a lot more high tech than the old holes in the ground where people used to put their trash. So then suddenly recycling becomes a viable alternative, financially speaking. The modern landfill is expensive, right? So then recycling comes in as a great alternative environmentally, but also financially. You can see this boat on the right, and this is a boat, from China bringing over tons of goods, and then these boats would turn around and go back basically empty. So it became financially feasible to put our recycling on these boats for very, very little, for almost nothing, and send them over to China to be processed and to feed their very quickly growing economy. And they wanted our material so much that the demand was such that we moved from the system of sorting on the curbside to having one big bin. They knew that they would get a lot more people recycling if it was super, super easy. So they said, no, you don't have to sort it. Be careful and read these labels and whatnot. Just throw it all in this bin. We really want this material. And the financials were there, and to have people and machinery sorting through it and getting all the trash out. And again, they just really needed it for their growing economy. And unfortunately, that's really set us up for the system that we have now, and for a certain amount of, frankly, just I guess you could call it sloppiness about what we put in our bin, that 17%. In 2011, Knoxville offers curbside recycling pilot program for the first time. In 2018, China has had enough. Their economy has grown such that they have great domestic demand, and they decide they don't want our garbage anymore. Of course, there's great material in there, but there's also garbage that they don't want to deal with, and nor should they. I mean, for their own environment, that was a great decision, because their solid waste system was not as developed. And so a lot of that trash really was ending up in creeks, in streams, and then ultimately in the ocean. A lot of the plastic pollution that we see in the ocean is from many Asian rivers. But if you look at what it is, it's American products. So it's great, honestly, that they closed the door on that system. In 2019, Knox County stops taking separated glass, and we're still dealing with the fallout from that and from taking it out of our curbside bins. People get very confused about glass. We are still taking it at the city drop-off centers, and it is being recycled down in Atlanta. And then finally, in 2019, in response to China's decision, more and more programs around the country stop or suspend their recycling. And then you start to see these articles in the New York Times and the Atlantic and all of these major outlets saying recycling is broken. And while, it's been interesting watching all of that information, because while it is true in some places, and recycling is definitely having like a much needed reckoning with itself and the improvements that it needs to make, those stories were always kind of the worst case scenario. They're from communities like in California where they were selling to China. We're not selling to China. So while the impacts have been bad in some places, they've been okay in others, like our own community. The real change that we've seen from all of that is just an increase in the bill that we pay every month to West Rock. And when I say we, I mean all of us taxpayers. So again, West Rock is our MRF near downtown. You can take a tour there. It's a really interesting facility. Again, it's the only MRF in the area. And so the city, us as taxpayers, we're charged for the mixed recyclables, the things that have to go through that sorting line. But we are paid for the materials from the recycling centers. So in 2017, we were paying them $10 a ton to process our single stream. That's mixed materials. Now today we're paying $37.50 a ton. So that went from $50,000 a year to $188,000 a year. But you have to keep in mind a few things. One, if we weren't paying them, we would be paying the landfill. We pay to landfill materials. And two, we're still getting a great deal. The national average is $67 a ton. So still have a thriving and solid recycling system here in Knoxville. This is a list of where our materials went in 2021. Again, this list changes all the time. I'm not going to read it off, but you can see where, some things are going as far as, I think Connecticut is the furthest. Our newspaper goes to Connecticut. But then some materials are sold right here in Knoxville to Philip Metals. I know you probably, if you're attending this, probably already know the basics of recycling, but I wanted to point out some what I call advanced do's and don'ts. They're interesting examples too of how recycling works, I think. For example, greasy pizza boxes. We used to be told not to put our greasy pizza boxes. And at my house, my husband was cutting out the big grease spot and recycling the rest, but people were dealing with that in various different ways. But about a year and a half ago, WestRock put out a press release saying, we want your greasy pizza boxes, don't leave a crust in there, but even if there's some grease stains on there, we want that material. And that change has come about because of market changes. So with COVID, everybody ordering stuff online, and just in general, the increase in online ordering over the past decade, the price of cardboard was so high that it makes it worth it for that downstream user to clean up that grease. So that's a change. Plastic lids on, that's an example of the technology changing. It used to be that they wanted the lids off your, plastic water bottle, for example. Now, and I'm not sure of the details, but the technology and the process they use to chop it up in the baths that they put it in to separate the different types of plastic, that process has changed. So now they say lids on. If you leave the lid off, it's not going to be captured by the system. It's just going to go through and come out the other end as trash. So if you want that lid to also be recycled, it needs to be attached to your bottle. And of course, glass. And I have a slide later going into more depth about glass. The big no's, if there's one takeaway today, it's please, please, please never put any plastic bag of any kind. If you can wave it around, don't put it in your recycling. We want rigid plastics only. You can see over there on the right, you have a lot of bags and you have some what we call tanglers. So the hoses and lights, those things are actually detrimental to the system. We as residents, we want WestRock to make money, because if they stop making money, we will lose our option to recycle, right? So every time these contaminants kind of clog up their system, they've got to stop the line. A human being has to jump in there and cut all that material out. And they're losing profits every time that they have to do this. So those things are harmful to the system. There are some things that are harmful and some things that are not. So we really try and focus mostly on the things that are harmful, and plastic bags is that number one thing. No snack bags with silver lining. Again, no bags at all. Aluminum foil and pie pans, that's a confusing one because of course we take cans. But just at that thinness in that process, they lose that material. Coffee cups, juice and soup cartons, ice cream cartons and freezer boxes, they might look like sort of cardboard or paperboard or paper from the outside, but of course they're lined with plastic. Otherwise, those liquids would, kind of leach right through, just like when you have a paper straw and it kind of goes limp after 15 minutes, or one of those old-fashioned cone paper cups next to the water bottle jug that, you have to drink fast or else it would kind of turn to mush. So those are not recyclable. Styrofoam is the worst litter wise, and also it's not recyclable. Paper towels and napkins. Yes, it's true, like paper, they're made from trees, but their fibers are so short that they can't recycle them. And again, there's those tanglers. The ultimate do in terms of your do's and don'ts is to check your local guidance. The city of Knoxville has we have a great website. We have a couple good pages, plus we have what's called the service and sort tool, and that's a screen grab from it over here on the right, where you can look up individual items. So if you're wondering about your glass, for example, what you can do with it, or a rubber band, or all different manner of items, you can look them up individually. There are hundreds of items that our team put in there, so that's a great resource. And if you've moved here from somewhere else, again, if you're in this sort of East Tennessee area, the rules should generally be the same. But if you come from somewhere else, you definitely want to check your local guidance, because it's really all dictated by that MRF, what kind of equipment they have and what kind of buyers they have in a reasonable trucking distance. And then a rule for plastic is, if plastic doesn't have a recycling symbol, don't recycle it. And if it does have a recycling symbol, it is not necessarily recyclable. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Oh, right here, in fact. So the 3s through 7s, this is an example of not recyclable because not sellable currently. So our official guidance, we have sort of an explainer about this on our webpage, but our official guidance on our stickers and at our recycling center remains that we'll still take the 1s through 7s as long as they're not styrofoam or bags. But currently WestRock does not have a buyer for that material. Again, it's just a market issue. This is common all over the country. But unlike plastic bags or food or glass, the 3s through 7s don't harm the system if they're not the bags. And so you're welcome, you can put them in if you want. And if you choose not to put them in, just make sure you check back maybe in a year or so, just to make sure we're holding on to that and not telling the public to take it out, for 2 reasons. One, they make up 2% of our recycling stream, so they're pretty inconsequential. There's high tech optical sorters at WestRock, and so they easily can pull that material out. It's not one of those detrimental things. But then also they're exploring some possible avenues for selling that in the future, one of which is chemical recycling right at Eastman, up in the Tri-Cities up there. Glass. And again, I can't say it enough, but glass is still collected at the city recycling centers. And that was taken out of the curbside because, stuff collected in the curbside does have to go through that sorting line. And so in that sorting line, one, it's hazardous to people. It damages the sorting equipment. It's really tough on the machinery. The shards of glass contaminate and thus reduce the value of the other materials like plastic and paper. And basically after it gets through the line, it's this product that you see on the right. It is like sparkly garbage. It's glass, but it's really a lot of just paper and little caps and plastic, and it's really not a material that anybody who is making glass wants to work with. So it doesn't matter how much we want to recycle our glass. If nobody will buy that product, then we're not recycling it. That's just how that works. I will say though, the stuff at the recycling centers, it doesn't go through the sorting line, right? People bring their glass there. It's a nice, pure, clean product. And so that still has value, and WestRock is still able to sell it to Strategic Materials in Atlanta. So that is still recycled. That's that difference. So how beneficial is recycling to the environment? There's a lot of benefits, but this is just one to kind of drill into, these are the different energy savings for when you use post-consumer material or recycled material versus when you use that same material, but the virgin version. So glass, your energy savings is the least really of the materials, only 30%, and then all the way up to aluminum at 90 or 97%. less energy used to make something. So that's looking at, again, all of that embedded energy. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you think about what glass is made from, sand, how much more readily available that sand and some other things, but how much more readily available that is than metals, which have to be, mined from the earth. It's a very energy intensive process, just starting at that point. And specifically in Knoxville, these are the benefits of our program in particular. So this is calculated with the EPA's WARM model. And specifically over on the left, 19,000 metric tons of CO2 avoided. And so that's the equivalent of taking 4,171 cars off the road for a year. So I think that's a pretty impressive benefit. You can see the other benefits as well. Tons of trash saved, space reserved in our landfill, and then quite a bit of water saved. But it's important to keep recycling in context and to not stop there, for recycling to be sort of the first step in the environmental actions that we take if we want to affect significant change with climate change. You could see recycling is right there in the middle in that moderate impact area versus all the way over on the right. It kind of broke the graph. They had to create a whole new section of the graph up at the top for having one fewer child. And you could see the flying, one round trip transatlantic flight is huge. Eating differently, driving different vehicles, or not driving at all is also hugely impactful. So again, recycling, it absolutely is an environmental win. It's a win-win. It's good for the environment. It's good for business. It creates jobs, and it's easy, let's face it, compared to some of these other items. So absolutely keep doing it. You don't need to lose faith or lose trust that your recycling is really being recycled, but just don't let it take all of the oxygen out of the room for other activities. What are the benefits of composting our food scraps? So again, that is some of that plant material that when it goes into the landfill, it's producing those really toxic, that methane, which is so toxic and such a terrible greenhouse gas. You're saving space in the landfill. We have quite a bit of space in our land, both of the landfills, but when a community needs to site a new landfill, it's tremendously difficult and tremendously expensive for taxpayers. So that's something we want to make our landfill last as long as we possibly can. Another benefit is it just retains those valuable nutrients in that food. Instead of it ending up in a hole in the ground, it can be used again for keeping your soil healthy and growing food or just decorative plants. We're really pleased. We finally, after a lot of work and working with a lot of partners and being asked by residents, to please set up a program like this, we finally, in February, launched our food scrap drop-off. And it's called the Knoxville Compost Pilot Project. And it's a partnership with Battlefield Farm, City Possum Farm, UT, TDEC. And so for the first time in Knoxville, people can go to the recycling center behind Barley's in the Old City, and there's our little setup there. The first step to participating is to jump on our webpage, knoxvilletn.gov/compost. And you can review these do's and don'ts that you see in front of you, and then take a short quiz. And if you pass the quiz, you get the code to those locks that you can see on the bins. And then you just bring down your scraps whenever it's convenient for you. It's open 24/7. Drop them off, and then our team here from the city transports that material once a week to Battlefield Farm, where it is put in a composter. You can see right in the middle there, that's the composter before it started filling up. And that food you can see over on the right, it's filling up nicely. We're about to turn it into that second bay soon. And then it's going to be broken down into nutrient-rich, a nutrient-rich amendment for the soil there at Battlefield, and will grow vegetables for the community. So over on the left, that's Chad Hellwinkle. He's with City Possum Farm, and also he teaches at UT. And he and Chris Battle are working on building the compost. Chris runs Battlefield Farm. And the composter was paid for with funding from TDEC. They're very supportive of the program, and it's unique. You can see those two blue pipes there. Underneath they have holes, and in the back there's a fan, and on the roof there are solar panels. And so once an hour, air is blown through into those bays that are now, covered with food. Food scraps, and also what we call the brown. So we put in a mix of wood chips, leaves, other kind of materials like that. And we'll turn it into the second bay, and then it will get turned again into the third bay. And by that time, that will take probably a few months, and then it will be added into the garden. So we are beyond thrilled with the program. It's only been going on for less than 2 months, but we're getting more and more material every week. And this is a unique program because it's a community composting model rather than industrial composting. For a long time, I thought, oh, we're never going to have composting in Knoxville until some business comes and sets up an industrial composter. But it turns out in lots of communities around the country, people are using this community compost model to, one, it's actually more sustainable. It keeps those nutrients right, very hyper local, instead of trucking something out of town. Chad Hellwinkle was involved with some research where he did, some research for the city of Nashville, because they were considering an industrial composter model or a community compost model. They went with the industrial compost model, but he tracked out how, the emissions from moving all of that material to the industrial composter, which was located outside of their county. And as you can imagine, there's just many fewer emissions by just keeping it local and having multiple sites. Multiple local sites. I love that this program, if it grows, we can easily scale it up. We have 4 other recycling centers, and we could put drop-offs there. We could also put them at parks or at rec centers. And then we already have other nonprofits that are interested in hosting these composters. So Imes and Beardsley, the Botanic Gardens are all interested partners. So we're just looking to grow the program and also to help sort of normalize composting. A lot of people are unfamiliar with it. So just like, this started back in the 80s with the recycling centers, just getting that ground game going and giving our community something to build on compost wise. So I think I'm ending about 5 minutes early, but I'm hoping you might have some questions for me.
Yeah, and if, let's see, unmute myself. Yeah, if you have any questions, if you're here in attendance, you're welcome to send those to me in the chat or the Q&A button below. And I've been texted a few questions already, and I have some questions for you as well. I guess just on a basic level, you're with the city of Knoxville, and you talked about the city of Nashville doing these things. Is recycling policy and services, is that pretty much the exclusive domain of city and local government? Or does any activity take place at the state or even the federal level of government?
Well, I will say, so there's a TDEC, Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation. There is a materials management group, and they haven't offered grants in the past couple of years. They had to clean up some old landfills that were a real expensive disaster. But in typical years, and for a number of years, they provide grants for the cities and counties, and we can apply for them. And some of the grants they offered, well, so in recycling, they would pay for some equipment And, to the tune of like $40,000, not a ton of money, but and then they would also provide a grant for education and outreach. It was like a 50-50 grant. So the state takes more of a trying to encourage us with grants. There is the whole system of tires. So, when somebody buys a tire and they pay, I think it's $1.50 per tire, and that $1.50 goes to TDEC. They take 50 cents of it, give $1 back to, not to the city, but to Knox County. And then Knox County has a nice little pot of money for dealing with tires in our community. As you can imagine, they're expensive to get rid of, so they're often illegally dumped. So they have that pile of money, and when the city finds an illegal dump or they find an illegal dump, we have those funds to clean that up and take care of it because of that money. So that's a great example of extended producer responsibility actually working. As far as the federal government goes, there is a lot of bills hanging out and making the rounds in recent years. I'd say there's much more activity at a federal level in terms of recycling than there has been kind of ever, to my knowledge, because the plastics, especially, people are very concerned about all of these materials ending up in the ocean and whatnot. So you can see that the federal government is trying to take some action. We'll just see how successful that is.
Okay. The next question is, are there any sort of gold standard communities that Knoxville might look to, or does Knoxville consider itself among the best in terms of what they do and offer for recycling?
I would say, the cities that I get jealous of are like Seattle and San Francisco, because they do offer the curbside compost pickup. It's a little tougher here. New York City also has a program isolated to one area of the city, but it's a little tougher here. It's a tougher sell because our landfilling costs in the Southeast are so cheap. So we don't have the same financial argument to make as these other cities do. So that's something that I hope that we get to in maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. I don't know. I think it'll happen eventually, but there are a lot of things that have to happen first. In terms of recycling and what we're able to recycle, I think it's pretty good. And I think that's because we're in the Southeast, where there is a lot of manufacturing and industry like that. In other parts of the country, there's less. And so I think it's a harder sell.
I've got a question. It's sort of based on a video that I happened to watch on YouTube. It just sort of randomly came up on my feed, and it was a recycling facility, and I want to say it was in Utah. It was definitely out west, and they were showing all of the different machines that were used to process the materials, and especially glass. And they showed how that can be then turned around into like insulation and shoes and things. And I thought, oh, I've never even heard of that. I was wondering, though, two things related to that video. In terms of our infrastructure, the things that our MRF has to process, are we, on the cutting edge? Do we have the best machines, I guess? And then the second question is, because you've talked about how this is a business and not a moral question, and if it sells, then that's going to lead to more recycling. Have you seen any movement in terms of businesses that maybe look to a Knoxville or a Nashville and they say, look, they're going to provide us with a lot of raw materials here. Let's move and relocate to those areas. So two different kinds of questions, but.
Yeah, in terms of our facility, I think it's good, but I don't think it's, it's not high tech. They're starting now to have robots, that pick out materials. It's a very cool facility. It looks a little rustic. And again, it's not the highest tech material or equipment, but it's pretty amazing still what, the different stations and what they can do. There are big magnets and pulling things and pushing things. And there's the optical sorter works on the plastics by, everything's rushing by really fast. It's figuring out what is what type of plastic, which is that the numbers indicate what type of resin it is. So they're detecting the different types of resin, and then they have little puffs of air that shoot it this way or that way or that way, depending. So it's pretty cool, all things considered. I know they do want to make some upgrades So I don't think it's top of the line, but it's definitely worth a visit. And then the second part of your question, that kind of question might start with me, like industries do talk to us, like Chemex. We met with Chemex recently, and they wanted to know about using our waste to run their cement plant. So there are those kind of bigger questions, but everybody pretty quickly figures out that the people they need to talk to are the MRF, right? Because the MRF is taking in not only residents material, but industry and from so many counties around. So they have a much better grasp on what's here. But yeah, I would imagine that probably comes into play for some businesses.
Okay. And I sort of following off of something you just mentioned again is your program again is for residential pickup.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see happen, or what happens with the businesses here? There's like if you go to Turkey Creek and there's all of these businesses, and you know that all of these businesses have like cardboard boxes just stacked up. Like, what happens with that material, and is that something that you would want to move into at some point in the future?
So I don't think that there's much appetite in our community to pass ordinances saying businesses must recycle, and other cities do that, but it just doesn't seem like something that traditionally we've done here in the South, telling businesses how to operate their business. I mean, I personally would love to see it, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I will say that I see them around town all the time. There are like cardboard dumpsters for recycling, and businesses can, especially for cardboard, because cardboard is fetching such high prices right now, businesses can set those up, and I assume so many are doing it because they're being paid, or it's cheaper to get that kind of dumpster picked up than a trash dumpster, which makes sense. That hauler, there's the hauler and they take it to West Rock. That hauler is being paid by West Rock for that material, whereas they take the trash one to the landfill and they have to pay to dump it. So I would imagine that those kind of work out in the business's favor in many cases. That's not true though with other materials, right? Like the plastics. That said, the fibers, which is paper and cardboard, they make up usually around 50% of what's recyclable. So getting that cardboard is a really great first step.
We've got a question here in the chat. Is it possible to have recycling pickup from the city or county for those of us who reside in rental townhouse communities?
So city services are for 4 or fewer units on a parcel. So if you're in a townhouse, it really depends. But if you're in a townhouse, well, basically, if you get city services already, if you get city trash, you are eligible for recycling. But if your trash there's a dumpster, or you look on your trash cart and it says like Waste Connections or Waste Management, that means you're not getting city services. That means either you or your landlord are paying for those services. But typically, if you are getting private services, you can call that provider and ask them if they offer recycling in your area. I will say too, anybody is always welcome to use our recycling centers. I mean, we don't care if it's from out of county, businesses, anybody is welcome to use that. So, and businesses do. We see a lot of what is clearly like business waste in our recycling centers.
Next question is, at Knoxville as a community, do you think that we are doing better, or in terms of our recycling, from our residents, or are we kind of leveling off? Have we hit sort of a peak? Like, where do you think we are?
I think that's a great question. My boss, who's over public service, who has been at the city for a really long time, he cannot believe that every month we still get completely passively, we get about 150 people signing up for recycling. He just keeps waiting for it to taper off. Since in 2017, when we issued the trash carts, we made recycling available to anybody. Before then, it was like there were wait lists and it was complicated, but he thought there would be a big spike that year, and then it would taper off. And it's just, there was a huge spike that year. There were 4,000 people, but it has after that year, it has not tapered off since then. So I think it's pretty robust. I think it's growing. We have lots of people moving to Knoxville, 10% since the last census. We grew by 10%. And I think people are getting used to this service and they continue to want it.
Sort of unusual question that occurs to me now. Did you see any type of service change as a result of COVID? Did that have any kind of effect on, your operations?
It did. So it did. The thing was residential waste skyrocketed and then commercial waste plummeted. So our transfer station, for example, we had a lot of business at the transfer station. I felt sorry for the Knox County convenience centers because they only serve residents. They don't serve industry, and they were struggling for the entire time. We, of course, saw, overflow from the bins at home because people were consuming everything at home instead of like spreading it around at their office or going out to eat or whatever. So everything that they're taking in, they're disposing of at their home. So there's extra trash. Plus, everybody went crazy with the projects. And there was an enormous amount of waste, especially, those first like 6 months, I'd say. And then the drivers got sick, and so we were down drivers to pick up the waste. I mean, it was very stressful. Yeah.
So, I am in Knoxville, and the glass pickup, I guess, has affected me. What are your thoughts? Not to put you in a difficult spot, but
yeah, no.
what are your thoughts in terms of how we've changed with glass pickup?
I appreciate it because honestly, if they make a change like this, they know that market is never, ever coming back. And it's kind of like a tearing off the Band-Aid situation where they might landfill it for a little bit and then find a buyer and then landfill it and then find a buyer. And then they're just landfilling and not finding a buyer and not finding a buyer. And they just go like, we need to inform the public. And I think that's really important to be transparent about that. So as consumers, we can choose, to go to Corks and get our wine in a refill bottle or, drink beer from a can, or, we can make those informed purchasing decisions because we know, in an ideal world, I would love it if we could recycle glass curbside, but again, that market's just not there. It's like we could be disappointed, but to be angry about a market is like, well, what can you do? So I'm glad that they finally said this is what's happening, and we could, as consumers, make a more educated choice.
All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of the question phase. That doesn't appear to be any more questions, but thank you so much for being a part of this event. Is there any email address or site or anywhere that you can go to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So knoxvilletn.gov and then /, and I'm forgetting your main page now. I think it's trash, but you could just Google City of Knoxville trash, or you could just go right to our compost page. We have a big recycling page for all the recycling nerds. The first page is really a lot of explainers and a lot of kind of duplication of kind of things that I've talked about today. We are really trying to meet everybody's curiosity. So.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. And I think I've been a big recycler for a long time and a bit of a recycling nerd, I think. So I really appreciate you being a part of this event again.
Sure. Happy to. Thanks again for having me.
And thank you for those of you that are